Well, welcome this afternoon to our Alliance discussion. We will be looking at on the minds of early career scientists, diversity, mentorship, civic engagement, and more. So I'm Tim Haynes. I'm the Senior Director of Communications here at Research America. And thank you so much for joining on Zoom today and for your partnership in the Research America Alliance. If your organization is not a member, we invite you to stay as our guest, but please do get in touch with my colleague, Joel. He's happy to connect with you to discuss the value that comes from being an Alliance member organization. We'll put his email in the chat. So I'm incredibly excited about today's Alliance discussion. It is my pleasure to introduce three of my colleagues, all of whom are early career scientists, and we're going to have a fabulous conversation with them today. First up is Sophia Casca. She is the Manager of Science Initiatives and Outreach here at Research America. She leads several different initiatives, but most visibly, she leads the Research America Civic Engagement Microgrant Program, which provides professional development, mentorship, and funding for student and postdoc-led science policy, communications, and public engagement groups. Sophia has a dual major doctorate in pharmacology and toxicology and in environmental toxicology. Her dissertation research was on opioid addiction and depression, and she completed a postdoc in pharmaceutical sciences where she studied novel opioid compounds in a medicinal chemistry and drug discovery lab. Next is Tori Schneider. She's our Global Health R&D Program Manager. And in her role at Research America, she works to expand and diversify the US government's investment in global health research and development. Tori received her doctorate in biological sciences with a focus on microbiology and immunology. In her dissertation, she studied the genetics of malaria parasites. And then we also have Jasmine George joining us. She is Research America's Dr. Lewis Sullivan Science Policy Fellow. And in her role as our first Sullivan Science Policy Fellow, she develops advocacy efforts to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the STEM workforce. Jasmine received her doctorate in biomedical research with a concentration in physiology, and her dissertation focused on diabetic kidney disease and toxic lipids. So before we jump in, just a little bit of background on how this conversation came to be. This is a little bit of a backstage pass to Research America. We have the privilege of working with these amazing early career scientists day in and day out, and they often bring their unique experience and their backgrounds into our conversations. And a lot of times we see those like carry on in Teams threads and other or email discussions kind of after the meeting is ended. And we've consistently benefited from those insights that they bring to the table. And so we thought this would be an amazing opportunity to help them bring those insights to our Alliance, but also for you, the audience, to jump in, ask any questions you have, and we'll get to them as we go along. So just to get started, I'd love to talk about people's initial exposure to the research that led you down the path of becoming a scientist. Tori, can we start with you?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Tim, for the wonderful introduction, and thanks to everyone that tuned in today. I guess just my introduction to science was very abnormal for my family, I guess, because nobody else in my family does anything like what I have done before. And so it really was just from when I was a kid, I was just so interested by science. Like I loved learning about it. I was one of those kids that like was obsessed with nature videos and like watched them all the time. And so when I went to my undergrad, I was, figuring out what branch of biology I was really interested in. And I started working in an undergraduate research lab that did bacteriophage research. And I just became so fascinated by the world of microorganisms and everything that we couldn't see with the naked eye and how diverse it was and how much there was to learn from it. And so I finished my undergrad in microbiology, and then I did my graduate work. I wasn't exactly sure if I wanted to stick with bacteria or try something else. And I ended up deciding to take a leap and try something new. And so as Tim mentioned, I worked on malaria parasites. And that really opened my eyes to just the world of public health and global health, because it's been such a obviously prominent scourge on human history and had such a huge toll and influenced a lot of advocacy around global and public health. And so that's how I've ended up here. I loved my time in research. I loved being able to explore different aspects of different organisms. And I think that that's something that me and my other colleagues on this call will probably say over and over again, because I think it's really just this curiosity that drives you through even like the lowest of lows of just being like, wow, this is so cool and it's so awesome that I get to work on this.
No, that's great. Sophia, can we hear from you?
Sure. Thanks, Tim, and great to see everyone here. I think my initial exposure to research was kind of multifaceted. I had always been interested in math and science, and got to participate in a lot of STEM exposure activities in middle school and high school. And while I did some undergraduate research at my undergraduate institution, I think what really solidified my decision to pursue a career in science was my first job after undergrad, which was at a research assistant in an academic lab. I think it was just kind of the perfect combination of things lining up. I had an amazing boss, fantastic colleagues, and then there were so many people in the department who became both my mentors and friends. I really loved the research that I was doing, everything that I was learning, everything about the field. So for me, when I had such a supportive and positive environment and experience, I think that's what drove me into science, because at that point, how can you not enjoy research?
No, that's great. Jasmine, what about you?
Sure. So I initially thank you, by the way, Tim, for hosting this, and thank you everybody for coming. But so I originally wanted to go to medical school before undergrad, before anything. I wanted to be that type of doctor, an MD doctor. And as I was kind of like talking to people that I knew who were interested in that, or people who like graduated from my high school or something like that, they said that research might be a good way to understand medicine. And so my initial exposure from there to research was a pre-matriculation program for high school seniors at North Carolina A&T, which was my school. And that program kind of exposed me to what research was and what the academic path would look like, and that kind of piqued my interest. So from there, I kind of took it upon myself to seek out professors who knew of like opportunities in research and internally or externally. And then I joined a bioinformatics achievement program in my sophomore year, which gave me the opportunity to actually do like summer research projects. And then from there, I kind of just got the research bug and found a research mentor at my school who, championed going to graduate school, especially for me, because she saw that I had a talent that I didn't even recognize in myself, because I was very intent on going to medical school. And so, I kind of took a leap of faith and decided to do a master's to try and get my research experience up to where, it would be competitive. And from there, I was like, okay, I'm ready to do the PhD. So that's kind of where I flourished.
No, that's great. You spoke a little bit about how mentorship helped shape that role of your academic career. Anything you want to add to that, or I open that up for Sophia and Tori as well, if you want to speak a little bit to the role of mentorship in bringing you to where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'll start. So for my PhD, I found my mentor from my master's. So I did my master's. I really, really liked the lab that I was in. I liked the subject material that I was doing, because diabetes and kidney disease is very close to my heart. I had several family members to pass away over a span of 20 years or so from kidney complications from diabetes or kidney disease. And so I was interested in it, and I decided to do my PhD. Later, through doing my PhD and kind of fueled by the 2016 election and going from there, I was kind of interested in science policy and the intersection between policy. So, and I noticed that my personal mentor was not, equipped to give me that kind of like guidance. And so I decided to do a lot of cold calling, running people down at conferences, trying to find somebody who could help me with my science policy endeavors.
Sophia, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. I'll let you jump in.
Thanks, Tim. For me, mentoring was just kind of an essential part, and still is an essential part of my career. I am the first in my family to go to college, and also, the first to pursue a graduate degree. I'm also part of the first generation born in the United States. So in terms of family, I didn't have anyone to look up to for advice on, how do I further my career when they themselves haven't gone to college. So it was just imperative for me to find people along the way, through undergrad, through grad school and beyond, to really figure out what do I need to do to get where I want to be.
Yeah, I would go off of what Sophia was saying also about how critical mentorship was for me. I wasn't the first in my family to go to college, but like I mentioned, I was the first and only person in my family to really pursue a degree in science. And so I didn't have any relatives or anyone to lean on in terms of questions or anything. So I really was, and I got really lucky. I had fantastic lab mentors. All of my lab experiences were so nice and welcoming, and I had such great mentors. You hear some horror stories sometimes, and mentors are so important. It really drives home how important it is to have somebody who's supportive of not only the work that you're doing in the lab, but also, the work that you want to do outside the lab and who you are as a person. And so something that I always recommend to people when they go to grads, I really don't have any great insights apart from just make sure that the mentor that you find is somebody who you like as a person and who likes you as a person.
No, I think that's helpful advice. Just for any students who may be watching or who may tune into this later, for each of you, what is one thing you wish you knew when you started your graduate program? And before we jump in, I'll just remind people that this is a chance to ask your questions of early career scientists. So feel free to drop anything in the chat or send a note my way. Jasmine, you look like you're ready to jump in. One piece of advice.
Yeah, sure. I wish that I actually, circling right back to mentorship, had been a little bit more intentional in picking my PhD mentor, because retrospectively, I feel like I was a little short-sighted in picking the exact same mentor that I had for my master's as my PhD, because, I felt like, especially now I'm looking back on it, I recently graduated for reference. I recently graduated in May. Now that I look back on it, I feel like I could have diversified my mentorship experience a little bit better and, added a little bit more value to my perspective about mentorship, being that I went from the same mentor from master's to PhD level. And so if I had to turn that into a nugget of advice, I would say, don't be afraid to diversify your mentorship experience and learn the value of an external mentor if you are in that position where you unfortunately did not get to do that diversification.
Yeah, I can hop in here. One thing I think that I think when I entered my graduate program, I was still sort of in this mode of feeling very much like an undergrad student, in the sense of sort of I'm here for the program, it's, and not being assertive about, exactly what I want, and, different issues that come up when you're working in an academic environment. And so I think it's really important when you go into grad school to recognize that you're an adult and that you have autonomy, and that you need to be very upfront about what you want. And, when things aren't going the way that you want, be really upfront about that, because I think sometimes people get a little roped into feeling like they're still very much, just a student, and you are a student, but you're also, an employee almost, and you're doing work for everyone. So you want to make sure that you're being really upfront about what you want. And that goes to sort of what, we were talking about mentorship as well, is when you're picking a mentor, being really upfront about, what your goals are, and, who, what you want to pursue. Because sometimes people get into these sort of things where they're just not entirely sure what they want, and sometimes they're really just focused on what they want in the lab. And I think it's really important to go in with thinking about like what you want when you're done, and making sure that whoever you decide to work for, and whoever you surround yourself with, are really supportive of what you want.
We had a question come in the chat that's a follow on to this. Just would one of you like to offer specific advice on approaching individuals to be your mentor, especially if you may be shy or introverted? How do you initially break the ice? Somebody's got to jump in.
I'll take this one. And I don't want to make this seem too awkward, but you kind of think of it like dating. So don't go into it thinking that this person's going to be your mentor. You want to test the waters a little bit. You want to get to know them and see if they would be a good fit for you, personality wise, time wise. Do they have the bandwidth to mentor someone? So I think if you approach it that way and just get to know someone, then I think if they're meant to be a mentor of yours, it'll happen. But I don't think you want to go in trying to force it to happen.
Yeah, I would second what Sophia said 100%. I think that the analogy of dating, while it is very sort of awkward, it is very accurate. As someone who's very introverted and shy themselves, I think it is sort of like you need to really go into it, again, like sort of like, this is what I want, and this is, like sort of what my goals are at this point in time, and just really being honest, and not trying to approach it like a job interview, in the sense of like, I need to say certain things so that they'll want to bring me on, but sort of more in the sense of like being just very upfront.
Absolutely. If I can, I just echoing exactly what Tori and Sophia said. Also, I'm more of an extroverted person. Again, like I spent a lot of time in my graduate education just running people down and trying to like pick their brain. So sometimes if you want like more of a casual introduction, a good way is just have an informational interview about just their lab and their research, and an informational interview is where you're asking the question. So, it kind of you can steer the conversation however you need, and kind of add in little tidbits about yourself to try and, initiate some kind of relationship with the person that you're interested in. So an informational interview, and there's plenty of questions online if you wanted to like start, brainstorming some things you would want to ask.
That's great. Another question that came in is just, what does the larger research ecosystem need to know about how to support early career researchers and scientists? Jasmine, I see you first, so we're letting.
Oh, as we've been saying for about 5 minutes now, the importance of mentorship. I think that investing, especially at the institutional level, investing in mentorship training for trainees is something that I would say needs to be tackled by larger funding institutions, maybe, or larger entities that can have reach to each institution, because I did notice that some PIs receive training in how to be a mentor to a PhD trainee, while some did not, and that kind of leads to, this kind of uneven experience, that a lot of people have. And so really standardizing that mentorship experience, and making that training a priority, the training aspect of a PhD program a priority, would be of pretty important interest to the larger research ecosystem.
No, that's great. Other thoughts people have on maybe a little bit beyond mentorship, or even thinking a little bit like Jasmine was talking about, how the institutions can support the scientists themselves to reach out rather than it always being initiated by students.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in that I think one thing that, and this is not even just an academia specific thing, but across the board and almost in every aspect of society now, is just that like population of scientists looks very different than it did decades ago, right? Like we have so much more diversity, we have so much more, level of, like different, a lot of disabled scientists that want to participate in research. And it's very much sort of like, the system is still decades ago and sort of trying to account for the fact that we have so many different perspectives and different points of view and different lived experiences that are coming into this area now.
Anything you'd like to add, Sophia, maybe speaking to those mid-level scientists and researchers on what they can do?
I was just thinking about this more broadly. It would be great to see, the research ecosystem treat graduate students and postdocs like people. And I mean that in the sense that, we need financial support, a living wage to carry out our, research, our daily lives. We need benefits, things like health insurance and whatnot, and retirement. Supporting us in those ways will help support the research ecosystem more broadly.
Right, and I think you make a really good point there, that speaks also to who is available to become part of this research ecosystem, that if we don't have some of those support systems in place, it severely limits what that next generation of researchers looks like. So securing that stable pipeline requires making it accessible to anyone who wants to be part of the who wants to be a researcher. There's a question here on the support for early career scientists, asking about associations, member organizations, those kind of things. What value do they provide, and in what ways can they be supportive? And Sophia, I'll start with you because I know you're really involved in this space.
Sure, thanks, Tim, and thank you so much for the question. I have had a fantastic experience with my scientific societies. I feel like mine is really focused on supporting early career researchers, so they're always creating programs and initiatives to support us. Like, for instance, they created a mentoring program to help graduate students and postdocs identify mentors and create a support system. They also provide training opportunities that you can add to your CV and your resume for whichever career path you choose to take. And I think part of the key here is if the scientific society you're involved in maybe doesn't have the resources that you need, is to figure out who to approach there, and tell them what your needs are and what you'd like to see. And I think you'd be surprised to see that they're really open to hearing from you. So if you're not getting the support you need, find a way to get that.
And chiming into that, I know that while there's a lot greater ecosystem that supports early career scientists than just maybe those associations or member organizations, particularly in a world full of social media. Like, there are now a lot of initiatives that go beyond traditional organizations that are there to help support and connect people across their careers. Would you like to speak a little bit to what that changing landscape has looked like and how it impacted both your career and your opportunities? And it's all right, I'll start with Jasmine, since I know she is the most recent doctor here in the room.
Sure. So a fun fact about me is that I am actually one of the people behind Black and SciPol. Follow us on Twitter. We started in 2020, and when there was like a boom of accounts that would showcase diversity in multiple fields in science. And so since that boom, I've kind of been a bit more, into the social media landscape, and I've seen just a lot of community. Like, I've seen people connect via Twitter to talk about their research experience and how they could parlay that into a PhD position. I've seen postdocs being received just by a Twitter conversation, or somebody posting, what their data was looking like, and somebody's like, oh, this is intriguing, let's have a conversation. And I'll post Black and Type in chat, but yeah, so the virtual communities I've seen have been fostering a broader sense of community that was not previously seen before, right? Because you don't often get to, interact with other scientists outside of like conferences and things pre-social media. So definitely seen that type of a change.
No, that is awesome. And the Black and Sci-Paul is in the chat, so everyone can click quickly and follow along. Tori, what about you? Or Sophia, either one, and other thoughts on what that landscape looks like?
Yeah, so I was involved in a very different sort of thing when I was in grad school. So it was sort of when I had first joined grad school, I'm an out queer scientist, and I really felt like I was very disjointed from the community. I didn't know a whole lot of other queer scientists, and so I actually joined a lot of different social groups in the area that was basically, I was in grad school in New York City, so there was a high concentration of other members of the LGBTQ plus community that were doing research as graduate students in New York. And so it was actually a really nice thing to just get to like sort of chat with them and, connect with people who are in the community that weren't necessarily at the exact institution that I was at, and, get to swap stories. And so I think it's, those really good like organic groups that sort of spring up just because of the existence of the internet and being able to connect and have people that you can bounce things off of and really like vent or like celebrate your successes together. And I think that those opportunities are great, and they help you feel really connected, because sometimes graduate school can be very isolating in a way. And so it was really nice to have that support structure.
No, that's great. Well, there's a lot of questions coming in. I love the engagement. But all of you have touched in the last couple of minutes just on the issue of diversity in different ways. And I think it is safe to say, and really awesome, that none of you represent maybe that stereotypical image of a scientist. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how your identity shaped how you approached your doctoral work and what you hope to achieve. Tori, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. So I think that when I went into grad school, it had just never really crossed my mind that I was going to become a full professor, because I didn't know any other full professors that were like me, which might sound sort of depressing, but it also was actually sort of nice for me in a way, because I knew that I was like, oh, I love research and stuff, but I want to look for other opportunities and what I can do. And so when I really was approaching it, I was really approaching it from the idea of, getting to explore different things that I could do with my degree that a lot of other people don't. I tried so many different, I looked at consulting, looked at working in like publishing. I got to look at so many different career opportunities, and, getting to meet like so many different people and hear about, their journey. It's sort of like everyone always starts their little spiel with like, oh, I don't know how to tell you to get this job because I got it in such an interesting way. And I think that's sort of the case for everyone. It's like you use your degree in such different ways, and people do such different things with what they've learned. And it just also goes to show how applicable like a graduate degree in the sciences is to so many different jobs, and how people who are in our position can bring so many different perspectives and knowledge base to so many different areas that you would never really consider. And I will say, sort of just so that it doesn't sound as depressing as when I started, I did meet some out queer professors when I was in graduate school. It just was not something that was ever shown to me before I had entered grad school. And so I think that the landscape is changing a lot. And sort of like I mentioned earlier, I think a big part, and like Sophia and Jasmine had touched on, a big part of like really making that a reality is just bringing in these support structures and, accepting that the face of science is different than it was decades ago.
No, that's great. Jasmine or Sophia, would you like to chime in as well?
Sure, I can chime in. So my personal experience, as I said before, like having family and people that I'm close to being affected by health disparities, really kind of informed my idea of, oh, this is the type of research I want to do. And so when I was doing that research, it kind of, and bringing my scientific perspective into something that is also culturally relevant to me, it kind of motivated me to want to evolve my thinking from being just a scientist that studies health disparities to more of an advocate for my community regarding health equity. And so I would say that my identity is almost completely, entrenched in what I do, because again, I am the science policy fellow for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and I'm also very, very passionate about health equity, and so that's extremely informed by my both African American identity, my queer identity, all of those identities.
Sophia, anything to add?
I think for me, the biggest thing was just when I started seeing so few women in science and not really having too many people to talk to about what that looks like long term, especially when you're thinking, oh, someday, what if I want to get married and what if I want to have kids? How do you juggle all of these things when you don't see that being reflected in the system that you're in? But I think even while I was in grad school, we started to see more and more women become assistant faculty. So that to me gave me a lot of hope. And I think seeing that definitely shaped my career and helped me feel like, okay, women do belong in the lab and they do belong in science.
Well, on that, obviously none of you are in the lab right now as active researchers, but can you spend just a little bit of time talking about how your lab experience connects to your present work and the things you're passionate about in your career?
Yeah, as I said before, my research was on diabetes, which is a disease that is a disparity within the African American community. And I specifically looked at food composition and fat content as it pertains to kidney health. And food is a huge part of African American culture. And so bringing my scientific perspective into that type of, just subject matter and how it affects the kidneys made me want to do kind of more research and more, activism as far as health equity goes. So again, very goes hand in hand. My identity and my research and my passion goes hand in hand.
Yeah, I can chime in. I think one very sort of big picture thing that my graduate school education has given me is the ability to conduct research really efficiently and be able to know where to find the answers to things. Which sounds very esoteric, but it's so being able to be I want to know if this exists or if somebody knows this and know where to go find that and how to figure that out. I think more specifically, my research on infectious disease, and I touched on this a little bit earlier in the intro, really sparked my interest in public and global health, just, from reading so much and, the social aspects of disease and how it really impacts every aspect of society. And I'll just lived through a pandemic. All of that really came together and really pushed me. I really wanted to become involved in that space rather than necessarily the bench work space. And I really feel like a lot of some people they're just made for research, they're so good at it, and I was never one of those people. I loved it, and but yeah, every so often I was just I feel like I have a lot of strengths in other areas, and I could really make an impact doing this sort of work, and so that's really how I ended up here.
No, that's great. And Sophia, for you, I'm going to tweak the question a little bit because we have a question in the chat on how can academia better support young scientists transitioning to science policy careers. And I feel like you're both a good example of this, but also that you can speak a little bit more broadly to civic science and what that means. It may help some people for us just to define that real quick, but it also speaks to the fact that science and that science policy and civic engagement don't have to be just inside the lab or outside of the lab. that there's a really powerful role for both. So I'll turn that over to you, and you can give a pitch for both microgrants and for civic science writ broadly.
Thanks, Tim. These are really great questions. I think one thing that translates from your time in the research environment is program management and project management, which translates very nicely into the policy world, especially when you're managing different policy projects. And that definitely ties into civic science, I feel like. Yeah, for those of you who aren't familiar, civic science is a phrase that was coined by Dr. Neil Lane back when he served as the director of the National Science Foundation. It's really about civic science is focused on engaging with communities and fostering relationships on topics or matters of interest for those communities, which allows science and scientists to connect on a more meaningful level for collaboration. And I think something that the broader ecosystem could provide to early career scientists are opportunities to become publicly engaged, and not only just opportunities, but full support for those, building that into the curriculum so that we see training, but also building that into the time that you spend doing this. It'd be great to see people not have to make up time on the weekends because they went to an event in the middle of the day centered on civic science or public engagement. So I think really making that a priority in academia to build these skills and these experiences will help support people who not only want to go into science policy, but just the general workforce, because all these skills are applicable everywhere.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. I'd love to get thoughts from each of you on this civic science and civic engagement side of just other fun ways you've either seen civic science played out or that you've engaged yourself in making science more accessible to the public. Jasmine, do you want to? I'll let you jump in because I have a hint at what part of this answer might be, and I just want to hear it. I'm excited about it.
Sure. So as far as making science more accessible, something that I find that extremely important, especially within my own community. And an example of me kind of doing that kind of work would be when I did my clinical research study, in which we were looking at general health parameters in African American communities and how that affects kidney health. And part of that I was able to do like speaking engagement and community events where we cooked food together, and we talked a little bit about food health and accessibility and resources that people can get if they are not able to, for instance, go to like a fresh foods grocery store, or and tackling really those food deserts and things of that nature. And so that's one way I would say, just kind of do it. Just go into your community, find an event, find a local initiative and just support it. Go show up and share your science, because people will definitely love to hear it. And I can speak from experience that people just love hearing about science and asking questions and being curious.
All right, great. Tori or Sophia?
I can go. One thing that I was really involved with when I was in graduate school was the National Science Policy Network, which probably a lot of people have heard of on this call. But they're great. They connect a lot of different science policy groups at institutions across the country. So, everyone's in a national network and can communicate with each other. This maybe is going to make me sound old to some people if they're on the call, but I was there when it was started. And I wasn't one of the people who started it originally, but one of my colleagues at my graduate institution helped start it. So I really saw it from its infancy. One of the things that I got to work on, though, at the very beginning was the inception of their policy memo writing competition program, which really gives students an opportunity to learn how to write a policy memo, or even just do policy writing in general, learn how to communicate an issue in science that's like very important to them. It doesn't have to be what they're working on, in a way that members of Congress or anyone who could have, any sort of role in helping to solve would be able to read and get engaged. And I love I love seeing what it's become, because I personally never wrote a policy memo that was ever published or really had that much of an impact, but I know a lot of people who did, and it's so like, I know people who went to Capitol Hill to advocate on behalf of the memo that they wrote for this competition, people who got it published, people who like really made connections off of that. And I think that that's a great way, or a great opportunity now that students have to do writing like that isn't just academic writing, and put it out into the world and have people look at it and like actually engage with it and cause like meaningful change from it, which I think is really incredible.
No, that's awesome. Sophia, anything else you'd like to add, or things you've seen in the among the micro grantees that are that you're really excited about?
So on I guess a very personal experience, back when I was in grad school, I would attend these things called Astronomy on Tap, which I think is very similar to Science on Tap, but our astronomy and astrophysics department put that on, and it was just a really great way to see the graduate students in the department come and talk about their research in a way that was accessible, because I'm definitely not a physicist by training, but getting to learn more about what was going on at Michigan State was wonderful, and that actually got me even more excited to do more kind of physics related activities, like touring our cyclotron and our facility for our isotope beams. And I think that initial step of kind of breaking down that barrier and getting people interested was key. And that's something that I really want to help our micro grantees do through the microgrant program.
No. Thank you. Those are great ideas from everyone. We've only got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we try to wrap up on time, but I wanted to go around and give everyone a chance to answer one question that you want to answer that nobody has asked yet. So this is, what's your question? What's your answer? And who wants to jump in first? Oh my goodness, blank looks.
I can start.
Thanks, Sophia.
But it's funny, we were talking about this right before we started. I think one thing that I would like to answer that hasn't been asked yet is how do your personal values and goals shape what kind of career you want to pursue? And I think that was something when I started grad school, I didn't take into account. I was so laser focused on becoming a PI and running my own lab that I didn't think about other things that I wanted in life. And so when I thought about, what kind of schedule do I want with my life? Do I want to work nights? Do I want to work weekends? Do I want to be able to take vacations? Do I want to make money? All those things kind of came into mind, and that's what helped me determine I wanted to go down a different career path. And so I think kind of thinking about what's important to you early on will help shape what kind of career you decide to pursue.
No, that's great advice. That's very wise. Jasmine or Tori, question and answer.
Question. Okay. What I haven't seen is what really motivated me to get specifically into science policy. And that I'd love to talk about and answer. So when I was a kid, my grandmother and my mother and my greater religious community was very intent on getting, the greater community to vote. And so I was always kind of exposed to the importance of just civility and being engaged with, just what's going on in the United States and even in the world. And so I kind of kept that in mind as I went through my motions of life. And then, when again, fueled by the 2016 election, fueled by just feeling like I need to do something, both as a scientist and a citizen. I kind of just put my nose to Google and try to find ways that I could, just get engaged with the community a little bit. And so I started locally. I started going to town hall meetings, community events, and things like that, and just trying to get a sense of what I can do. And from there, that led me to National Science Policy Network and Research America. So
that is awesome. We are fortunate, and we are fortunate to have you. So thank you. Tori, we'll wrap up with you. Question and answer. Question and answer.
So I think we've had a lot of questions about how being a researcher or being a scientist has impacted your career, but not really how it's impacted your life as a whole, which sounds very existential, but I mean it in the sense that I feel like when I went to grad school, or when I first got into grad school, I was such a different person than who came out of it. And I think in a good way. I think I came out of it, like I said, really being somebody who's a lot more upfront about what I want. And like Sophia was saying, what you want in terms of your life and how you advocate for yourself and things like that. But I also just think that being a scientist has really helped me have something to go to when, everything else in the world seems so overwhelming. Because I just love I never, like I said, I determined that I wasn't really a research for life person, but one thing about science that I love so much is that I love reading about it. I love talking about it. When everything else is sort of bleak, I love being able to just go read about how somebody figured out how, I don't know, lizards evolved on some random island. It's just so interesting to me. And it's such a nice escape in that way of just not reading about current events and being able to read about just something that helps you have such a nice childlike wonder to the world in a way. And so I feel like I loved, every part of learning how to be a really active scientist and a really active researcher.
No, that is awesome. I think that is a great note to end on. So Dr. Casca, Dr. Schneider, Dr. George, it has been an absolute pleasure. I just feel privileged to have gotten to sit here and chat with you and hear more about your work and your insights and your passions. And I would encourage everyone here to reach out at any point if you've got questions for any of these remarkable individuals or for us here at Research America. We also welcome your ideas for future Alliance discussions. So one quick announcement before you go. I hope you will join us next Wednesday, October 19th at 2:30. Our next Alliance discussion will feature Rob Smith. He is the Managing Director of Capital Alpha Partners. And Rob will be discussing, sorry, losing my voice here. For that, so please join. There's a registration link in the chat for that discussion. Look forward to seeing you all there, and thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tim. This has been lovely.
Yes, thank you.
I feel like we could all just stay on behind the scenes and do this for another hour, but
Pretty much.
back to work for all. Thank you so much.